Now, so far we've seen how to define a function and call a function. Now, when you call a function, Python essentially executes the code that you contain in the function's body. Now, so far, all we've done is printed a welcome message in the form of a string to the screen. But I just want to spend a brief moment observing what this means. So as you can see, we've defined our welcome function, and if I type welcome with a set of parentheses, we end up printing hello and welcome, how are you, to the screen. And this is because we've included a print function inside the function definition. Now, if we think of the statement print hello, what type of object are we working with here? Now, you may be thinking we're working with a string object here because we're printing hello to the screen. But if I place this inside of the built-in type function, you can see that we print hello, but we also return an object of none type. So you can see here, if I take a look at the type of welcome, we can see that welcome is a function, and if I take a look at the type of a function call on welcome, we can see that we return an object that is of none type. And we can't really do a lot with none type objects, whereas we could do something with string objects. So if I try to call the welcome function and then place a dot and try to access a method called upper, you can see that when I run this, we print hello and welcome, how are you, to the screen, but we also run into an attribute error telling us that none type object has no attribute upper. And this makes sense. We're returning a none type object and we can't call a method to work with this object because it doesn't have the respective attributes. Now, the beauty of functions is that they can bring back a result in the form of an object that can then be used in other objects, which can then be used in other objects and so on. And we can use what is known as the return statement to end the execution of the function call and return the result back to where the function was called from. So let's see an example. Let's go back to our welcome function. And if I now, rather than printing out hello and welcome, how are you, I assign this to the variable message and we store this string object inside message. After this line of code, I can place the keyword return and then I can return the variable message, which we know stores a string object. In other words, we are going to return a string object once this code is executed. So if I now run this function definition and then call the welcome function by putting welcome with a set of parentheses, you can see we still print hello and welcome, how are you, to the screen. And if I take a look at the type of welcome, we can still see that it's a function. And if I take a look at the type of a call on the welcome function, you can see that we return a string object. And if we think back to our string section, what can we do with string objects? Well, if I call the welcome function, we know we get a string object. I can then place a dot. I can then put upper with a set of parentheses and call the upper attribute on this string object. When I run this code, we print hello and welcome, how are you, in capital letters to the screen. So by returning an object through a function, we can then use that object elsewhere in our code. Now, the statements after the return statements are not executed. So if we were to return something and then continue writing code, that code will not be executed. And the returned object is known as the function's return value. And we can use these return values to perform further computation in our programs. So let's run through a couple more examples. Let's define a new function called the doubler. So we'll put def, and then we'll call this function the_doubler. And inside parentheses, we're actually going to include a parameter called num for this example. I can then place a colon. I'm then going to create a variable called result, and I'm going to set this equal to num, which will be passed into the function, times 2. I'm then going to return result. If I now call the function the doubler and then put a set of parentheses, and inside the parentheses we pass in a number, let's say 15, you can see that when we run this code, we get 30 returned. And if I take a look at the type of object we are returning, so if I put type with a set of parentheses and then put the function call on the doubler and pass in 15, you can see that we return an int object. So I can now use this object in our code knowing that we'll be using an integer value. And let's do one more example. Let's create a new function called play_again, and inside parentheses I'm going to place a parameter called answer. I'm then going to put if answer that's passed into the function equals yes, then return true, else return false. So you can see here we have two return statements. Now if we pass in the argument yes into the answer parameter, we will return true as a value which we know is a bool object, and the else return false part of the statement will not be executed because we would have returned true. If answer doesn't equal yes, we will return false. So if I put play_again and inside parentheses we pass in the string yes, you can see that we obtain true. And if I put play_again and inside parentheses pass in the string no, you can see we return false. If we were to check the type of object we're returning, you can see that if I put type and then execute a call on the playAgain function and pass in the string yes, we can see that we return a bool object. So if I wanted to, I could now use this object inside other code. So I could create a conditional statement. So let's put if play_again and inside parentheses we put the word yes equals true. So when we execute the play_again function with the argument yes, if that equals true, which we know it would do from our function definition, we will then print great choice, let's play again. Else I will print see you next time. So if I now run this code, you can see that because the function call with the string passed in as yes equals true, we print to the screen great choice, let's play again. And if I change this argument to be the string no inside the playAgain function, this would evaluate to false and therefore it doesn't equal true, so the else statement is executed and we print see you next time to the screen. So we're able to call a function and include it in other parts of our code by returning the object from the function call. Practice creating a function and returning an object of choice. Try to then use that object in another part of your code, and the way you'd get that object is by calling the function accordingly. This is what makes Python such a powerful language. We can create functions and include the results in other parts of our code to really make our programs dynamic in nature.